This episode of the Better Two podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and M.Needom, author of My Days with the Dark Muse, as well as Love is Worth Waiting For. Hi, gang. Donna here. Thanks for tuning in to the Better Two podcast. Today's guest is Melanie Mitchell. Melanie calls herself the accidental entrepreneur. She tells us of a story where there was a time in her life when she was working as a recruiter. And she decided that she wanted to change a pace. So she decided to help a friend. Well, things didn't work out necessarily as they should have. And she takes us on that journey. So tune in. Hi, Melanie. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So we're just going to cut to the chase with your story. You were working for somebody, a friend, and you were working in the staffing and recruiting, which I did do that for a brief time, and that was not a great fit. But you were doing that, and somehow this relationship with a friend, I know it ended up suffering, but how did you end up really realizing that this isn't what I want to do?
So, yeah, I was a recruiter for 20 years. And in 2016, lots of stuff was happening with the company. I made a decision to leave. I was going to put myself in the job market. And I wanted to take a little bit of a break because I needed to just refresh and figure out what do I want to do? So I went to go work for a friend. And at the time, he had two businesses, and I was going to help really run from an operational standpoint, one of those businesses, and so that he could focus on something else. And then as things progressed, things were just rapidly changing. And all of a sudden he's like, no, I'm going to get rid of this business that I am supposed to be running. And I want you to help me run this other business, which financially wasn't stable. Now, in the middle of that, I should have just said, no, that's not what's for me, logically in that moment. I didn't. And that ended up just kind of spiraling. And then there, almost halfway through the year, I just kind of woke up and, out of my fog, and I was taking stock of what was happening in my life. And I said, wait a minute, I'm pursuing this man's dreams. What are mine? And realizing I didn't know what those were. And, it just, I don't know. There wasn't any, there was a little bit of signs. Things were starting to go south. And, of course, they just add up, they're little in the beginning, and then they become this mountain by the time, it all comes to fruition. And so I started, okay, I'm going to go look for my own job. That started to fracture, anything that had to do with me fractured our relationship. And that's when I just was like, are you really my friend? Are you really there to support me? Or, the fact that you can't understand that what I need, emotionally, but financially, that was a big piece. And that you can't support that unless I'm supporting you 100% and sacrificing everything in my life. So yeah, it was little things that added up into becoming the mountain that it was.
So there really wasn't a lot of give and take. It was all mainly take.
It was definitely take. Somebody asked him once, what do you do for Melanie? What do you, you're out here trying to do all these things, but are you checking in on Melanie? And, he's a narcissist. I'm very comfortable saying that because he's a narcissist, and he made this was one of those awakening moments where he made a comparison of the Forrest Gump movie, where Forrest is in the war and he's running in and he's going in and he's pulling all the bodies out and he's running back and forth. And, it's Melanie's job to take care of all the stuff that's over here.
Wow.
And so then I literally sat with that, and that's always lasted with me. And I think those are the things that, when they last with you, they make sure that you never forget it. So you never go back to it. And, here I am, I'm picking up all the pieces, but nobody's here picking up what's happening in my life. Sure. Nobody's taking care of, nobody's stopping and saying, are you okay? And so, when he made that analogy, that was definitely, that may have been that moment where, now that I talk about it a little bit more out loud, that it was like, oh, that went south. This is going south.
Well, I think sometimes talking about things out loud helps us reframe things. If we don't reframe it, we keep it tucked away at how we think the perception is. And sometimes as we get further removed from that event, we can look at it through different lenses and say, okay, my perception here was a little clouded, but it wasn't totally, or I was way off base, or I was right on track. And they always say hindsight's 2020. We can always see things much clearer than when we're going through it. But the thing is, those tests make us who we are.
Absolutely. And, and at the end of the day, and people say like, you must, do you hate him? I don't have a relationship with him anymore. I made a very strategic decision to remove people that were toxic in my life. And I own the fact that I stayed, and I allowed, to a certain degree, I allowed, things to happen. And I had to take ownership of my responsibility, but also why that was in me to stay in a situation like that, and really try to dive into that of like, what is it within my own self that didn't make me, what is it that forces me to be in like really bad situations until I speak up? And until so I really own that aspect of like how I got there. But then I also fully own how I got out of it. And
that's the thing. Most people don't want to confront. If you're in victim mentality, you don't want to confront why you're there. You want to wallow, you want to stay stuck. And it's not that you really want to stay stuck. It's just you're familiar with it. You're comfortable with it. So it's much easier to stay than make the changes. Because no one really wants to sit there and look in the mirror and go, oh, look at that gnarly beast that's there.
Yes. It definitely was hard. I mean, I went through a complete and total life transformation. This was back in 2017, and everything in my life really upended because I had, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Thought I had turned off my calls, but
okay.
But I really went through a whole life transformation. I went through a life where financially, my careers, my friendships, relationships, all exploded in one moment. And, and it didn't happen overnight. It was accumulation of many things. And, I hit a rock bottom. And I think sometimes though, you can't start to really analyze and really take, you can't step away from yourself and look at yourself until you hit that rock bottom. And it is scary and it wasn't pretty. But also knowing then who were those cheerleaders that were really going to support me, that were going to lift me up, even when I was that gnarly beast and I'm, not a pretty sight.
Right. And I mean, that's, you find out at that moment who your true supporters are and your true friends.
Absolutely. And, and I was very conscious of tightening that circle. So it wasn't just, it wasn't this large group of friends that I didn't really need that large group of friends. I just needed, a handful of people that were true, that they walked the talk that they spoke, and, that they really were that they were going to be there for me in the good and the bad.
I think that's something that we miss teaching kids and miss learning as kids, because we're all striving to be part of the popular crowd. We all want that large group of friends, but the truth of the matter is that large group of friends really is not truly your friends. I mean, we see it with social media now, but the fact is you have a core group of friends that are not your yes men. They're not going to sit there and go attaboy all the time. They're going to turn around and look at you and point out your flaws. They're going to point out your truths. They're going to cheerlead you on, but they're also going to have your back when you're down. Yeah. And they're also going to be your truth teller, because you can be surrounded by a ton of people, but if they're always telling you yes, or what you want to hear because they think they're going to get something from you, then they're not really your friend.
No, and oftentimes too, like, it was just an interesting experience having, going through this later in adulthood, and really, and because everything else had been very career, I had been on a very consistent career track. And it got by one person, very much derailed from where I had been. Now there's some great things that came from that. And so for that, I am appreciative, because for whatever reasons, we do go on the journeys that we do. And, so sometimes it's good to, also, in a sense, be grateful that I did go on that journey, but also I had to learn to forgive myself first and foremost, and forgive myself for making mistakes that logically I knew, again, hindsight's, we'd all be rich if we had,
True. Very true. Very true.
If hindsight paid, we'd all be millionaires. So,
very true.
But, forgiving myself was also a big component of that, and allowing myself that forgiveness for making mistakes and knowing that it was and that it would be okay.
That's one of the hardest lessons any of us need to learn, is to forgive ourselves, because we hold ourselves, no matter what critics on the outside world say to you, you internally, maybe not let the world know, but internally you hold yourself to a much higher standard than everybody else.
Absolutely. And I am my worst critic, and I am, and I do hold myself, if I can't achieve, if I feel like I've let myself down, then I will carry that weight. I'll carry that weight for a long time. So, until it just gets too heavy to carry anymore. So yeah, forgiving myself was a big, crucial factor of just moving on and being able to reframe where I wanted my own life to go.
So when you left, this job that he had you doing, was it still part of staffing and recruiting, or was it something totally?
No, it was totally different. It was, he had a social media marketing firm, and then also he was running a nonprofit. So, which I have some nonprofit experience, that's where actually I got my career started, was in nonprofit and doing special events and fundraising. And so staffing was actually kind of a whole new thing for me, that I built this career, when my first job, I had no experience in it. And I honestly was like, I'll take that job, and if it doesn't work out, I'll look for something else. It was, over 20 years ago. So,
no, I get it. I get it.
When you're younger, and, you're like, I can get something else. It's okay.
Yeah.
So it was different in a lot of ways, but, at the end of the day, it was also supposed to use my strengths, because I had been running $1 million branch prior. I was from an operational standpoint, I was responsible for staffing, my own staff, my own budget, my own forecasting. So, I had all of that experience, but, I learned, but it really, you have to be very wise in terms of who you decide to partner with, whether it's family or close friends, and make sure that you can actually have a reciprocal working relationship. It can't constantly be, you can't just be the one that gives constantly, and then, the other person just constantly takes.
And another thing people need to be aware of too is, okay, so you're joining a startup company. That's awesome. That's great. But you have to be careful. I remember when I first moved up here, it was the second time I moved up here. The first job I took was for a staffing company. They were going to teach people how to train their telemarketers and help for phone sales. So I have very little background in this. I have a background in communication. So I get the job, but it was me doing the cold calling and going out to interview these people. I don't have, I interviewed people at Chuck E. Cheese when I was assistant manager. This does not qualify me. I worked as a telemarketer one time in my life. This does not make me a qualified candidate, but they were hungry. I needed a job. So here we go. So I go out to these companies, and I would, interview people, and that was fine. And then this is where it gets really weird. So I'm in the office, and I'm looking through lists and everything. And the landlord comes in and knocks on the door. He knocks on the door, and he comes in, and I'm like, yes. And he goes, yeah, tell your boss if I don't have the rent check by the end of the week, I'm going to close the office. I'm going to kick you guys out. Okay. So, panic is there, but I'm fine. And I had gone to this one company 2 or 3 times already. So my boss comes back and I tell my boss, what the landlord said. And so he's like, well, you need to go to this company in the city. I'm like, okay, fine. So I had already been there twice. We had never found a candidate they liked. So I interviewed people, and this one guy, it's a sales job. This one guy comes in with plaques, trophies, and everything else. And I'm just like, who brings all this to an interview? But anyway, long story short, so I wrap up the interview, and the guy who has hired this company looks at me and goes, so, out of all the candidates that you presented with me, I'm like, yeah. He goes, how about you? I'm like, excuse me? He goes, how about you? How would you like to do an inside sales job? I'm like, okay. So I'm like, I have to give 2 weeks notice, blah, blah, blah. I went back. They fired me on the spot.
Yeah.
And so I started the next day. I don't know what happened with the telemarketing company, but my whole point is there was so much insecurity with the telemarketing staffing company that it's like, if you know that's going on, you need to find a way out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And fortunately, I was presented with one.
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that when I started seeing writing on the wall of finances and just some things that were happening that should not have been happening, I started looking for another job. And truthfully, I landed a job fairly quickly. And that's, when a lot of that tension happened of, how dare you leave me? How dare, it was like you betrayed me.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it wasn't like, but I need money. Like I, right. It's, I need, I'm a single mom. I have a teenage daughter at home, I need to be I have to be a responsible adult. And, and there's things, of course, that from taking that opportunity and going through that process, but it was getting me back into a space that I was, definitely it was back into recruiting and staffing. And, but also from that standpoint, when somebody doesn't understand your reasons for making certain decisions, when it should be pretty evident, it's like, now that was a time where it's all becoming crystal clear, and, putting those wheels in motion and really just making that happen was, the start of, the big start of it, because I was like, I don't know, like I would be, I maybe would be sad, or, I could definitely say disappointed if the shoe was on the other foot, but I'm not sure that I would just be angry. I'm not even sure that I could get, because I've had staff leave me before. Of course, there's always times that you're disappointed when, certain people leave and things, but, I've never been angry about it.
No. And I mean, same thing with the position I was in. It's like, look, I have rent to pay. I'm splitting a place with a friend, but I still have certain necessities I have to meet. And, when the landlord is knocking on the door telling you that the office may close, you just don't get a warm fuzzy. And I mean, when I told them, I said, well, I have another, I was offered this job. They were just livid with me. And I'm like, you haven't been able to give these people a candidate that they really wanted. You guys brought these people in. I interviewed them. They weren't happy. What was I supposed to do?
Right. It's like, and at some point too, other people have to talk, you do. And that's part of also taking away the pressure on yourself is like, other people have to own their responsibility in that, in any type of relationship, whether it's career, personal friendships, whatever it is, there's 2 parties, and each party has responsibilities to that relationship. And if one is not, holding up their end, then it's okay to say, okay, this isn't for me. I need to get out of this.
I think one of the biggest things, and I had a guest on, wow, okay, I think season 1, this will be season 5 or season 6, I'm not sure. But I had a guest on that talked about expectations. And the truth of the matter is we don't have that conversation. We're not taught to verbalize our expectations. We're taught, especially as women and as kids, when we're kids, that you need to sit down and be quiet. You're not supposed to have a voice. And so we don't know how to communicate our expectations. And people will go, well, that's just in the bedroom. No, this is real life all the time across the board. Yeah. Even with girlfriends, you don't know how to, talk to each other about the expectations of what you think should be in that relationship.
Absolutely. And, and it's one of those things that I think because we don't choose to have those conversations, or we don't know how to even, we're afraid to, because it is scary. It's, especially like with girlfriends, when you have those, it's a scary thing because you think like, oh my gosh, am I asking for too much? Or, so now we have this way about ourselves where we honestly just run and disappear. And, we don't address it with that person. And, instead of just having an honest conversation. But yeah, like if you feel like, there's always going to be a give and take. I mean, I'm a natural giver. That's just like kind of inherent of who I am. I call it, I'm a Cancer. And so, we're nurturers. And if you want to believe in the horoscope.
I read cards, so I understand.
Right. So I'm a nurturer. I'm that is, it's definitely who I am. But, so I'm always probably going to be more of a giver to, a large degree. But at the end of the day, if I feel like, is there some equal here? If we have two bottles, are they staying level? And it's okay if they shift up. My best friend and I, we joke like, because we both suffer from anxiety, and like sometimes right now she's studying for a PMP exam. She's got all these things going on. And, I'm pretty good right now. So I'm like, as long as one of us is, up and the other one is down, I said, we're okay. It's if one of us were both down at the same time, I said, the world's in trouble. So.
Yeah, my husband and I used to have a blue panda that if one of us wasn't in the mood to talk or whatever, and we're kind of down, the blue panda went on the kitchen table. Yeah. And that was just, okay, I know we're just going to, we'll just be chill today. When you were describing there's two things. The Ace of Wands in my tarot deck is basically your whole thing about how things started building up, because it builds up just nice and low and then gets bigger and bigger and then blows up. So your whole situation, I was going to say that earlier, but I'm like, I don't know if she would subscribe to that. So I didn't. But the thing about expectations is the other problem about that conversation is, if you wait to talk to somebody about the expectations because your expectations aren't being met, they're going to blow up. Right. It's not about 75% of the time. They're not going to take onus that, hey, maybe I was wrong. I had this happen last summer. A person and I got into it, and she went after me, and I just backed off. I just let it go. Her and I are no longer friends. But here's the thing. I'm willing now to look back and say, okay, it was my expectations. It was my fault because my expectations weren't being met. However, the outburst that followed, which was uncalled for, is on her.
Right.
So therefore, there's an impasse and there's no going back there. But I'm willing to take ownership. And that's the thing. You have to be willing to take, if you broach that subject and it's not received well, then that's on you because you verbalize your expectations. And that's okay. But if you start verbalizing your expectations earlier, you might not get into these traps.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you have to give yourself permission to have those conversations. It doesn't have to be, like I think about, it's funny because my best friend and I, we've never had an expectations conversation, but we do talk about things about like, like I feel like I'm dumping too much on you. And it's like, no, it's okay. Like we have these open conversations of like, I'm, like, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't asked how you're doing. I dumped on, I sent you a text and I just dumped on you, and wait a minute, I didn't ask how you were doing. Are you okay? Like I'm going to check in on you right now. Are you doing okay? And so, we have those moments where we're able to take that step back, and that's what makes our friendship work. That's when, because we're able to say like, no, it's okay. It's like, I'm good. Or, hey, I'm right now in this space and I can't deal, I've got this going on. Can we, talk about this later? So we have that, we have that ability to have those conversations with one another. And I think it is so important because you really have to, but you have to give yourself permission to say, I need to have that. Like, it's okay to ask for things that you need in a relationship of any kind. especially if your expectations are not being met. And you haven't been clear though on what that is. But it's also like working with a boss, they says, go do this project. And, you present something and go, well, I'm not happy with what you did. Well, were the expectations set?
I had a freshman art teacher who, her and I had a personality conflict, but she would sit there and she'd come around to everybody's still life and she'd be like, oh, well, that's not right. So she comes around, draws mine, comes over and says, that's not right. And she sketches. So I go back, redraw. About the fifth or sixth time, I look at her because she's done this with everybody. And me being me and being a freshman in high school, she draws it. And I just said, okay, let's see this. So I traced over everything she drew, everything. She comes back and she looks at me and she goes, that's not right. Okay, yes, I should not have said it, but I did. I'm like, well, you drew it. I just traced over it. And I failed art. Not only because of that, she tried to bribe me to bring in Chinese peppers for her cooking class. And my mom's like, no, you're not. So I failed art. But anyway, it's not that I couldn't draw. It was just, she had an attitude with me and I had one right back. And there was no way those expectations were ever going to be met.
Right.
Just by the description of that still life, no matter what I drew, and art is subjective. Art is through the eyes of the beholder. So, I mean, I know there's certain forms and everything, but it's still never going to be exactly like everybody else's. You're going to put 20 artists in the room. They're not going to paint the exact same picture. So my expectations were never going to be met. Her expectations were never going to be met. So there was no win.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've never understood. My daughter had a similar, where I think it was her 8th grade art class. Like her art teacher was like, and she has creative talent. And I don't even remember what it was, but she just said, like, the art teacher was like, basically, this isn't good art. And my daughter is like, according to who? And the teacher was like, well, me, I'm your teacher. And she's like, but who are you? My daughter has always been a very, my daughter came out born just determining her own. She was 3 months. She was born early, and no matter what, they tried to stop it for 3 months and she still came early. So she's always been that little personality where she literally is like, and who are you?
Well, I mean, and for like me, because I was at an all-girl Catholic school at the time, because I flunked art, I couldn't take any more art classes. So then when we moved to a different city and I went to a different school, my art teacher, I was one of his pets. He loved my work. And I took art my senior year and I was a member of the art club. So it was just like, because this one woman decided that she didn't like me, she stifled everything.
Yep.
And is that right? And I think since we're talking about school, we need to have a class that talks about our mental health, that talks about expectations, that talks about relationships, because whether it be your boss who's going to sit there and say, well, I don't like that project, or the teacher that's going to be like, well, that's not quality work. You need to know that, sometimes you're never going to meet somebody else's expectations because their expectations are not realistic.
Absolutely. And we do need to have, these are the conversations that we should, it's great we're having them as adults, but the fact is, how much better would things have been, or easier had we had these, as kids, and understanding that, as women in particular, that you can have a voice, you can have an opinion. You don't have to just accept what you're told to do and how to do it, and that, sometimes, no, you're not gonna be everybody's cup of tea, and that, that's not gonna be a win-win, there's no win in that situation. No matter what you did, you were never going to win that woman over.
Right.
And so, and the same goes though for our relationships now, is like, sometimes you're just going to hit an impasse. And you have to be able to say, okay, this is one of those times that no matter how much I'm trying or what I'm doing, this isn't working. And I need to step back and I need to step away.
Yeah.
And be okay with it and be okay with that. Because as women, we try to fix things.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
We're going to fix it. We're going to make it
Yeah.
all better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's like we work hard. We try to make this person better. We try to appease this person. We try to, we try to fix things like you said. I mean, I've talked about in the past, my husband was legally blind, so he could still see, but he couldn't see out of one eye completely, and he had very poor vision in the other, and he couldn't see lasers. But yet my husband wanted a chop cut miter saw because he had this plan to redo the pantry. Now, I know most likely people are like, why would you let a blind guy fool with a saw? Well, here's the truth of the matter. He never used it. It's brand new. It's sitting in the garage, and I will sell it eventually. But it's just one of those things where it's like, I did it when he's like, can we get it? It was kind of like, okay, to appease him, the part that wants to please, that we're taught that as women, we're supposed to please, said, okay, you can get it. I figured most likely I would have ended up cutting because he wouldn't have done it, but it was all about pleasing him.
Yeah. And and it's okay to do that every so often, but it's when you develop the cycle of that's all you do.
Well, for him at the time, he was terminally ill. So, at that point, when you're dealing with somebody terminally ill, that's a whole other set of expectations that you don't even realize you're doing until that part is over. And then you're unpacking going, wait a second, I've been living in anxiety and fear and people pleasing for X number of years, and I didn't even realize it.
Oh yes, I had my mom was terminally ill, and we lost her last in December of 2020. And so, and then prior to that, we had lost the year before we lost my dad. So we went through all this, So this. And as the daughter, this is a whole other conversation.
Oh yeah, I know. No, I've lost my mom. I understand.
But it's like one of those things where, I think I didn't, it's funny because I did the opposite with my mom. I didn't necessarily want to please her by giving her everything. I wanted to push her because I wanted her to be better. I was like, no, I want my mom that is this, this. It took me a while to say, this is who she is right now. And maybe sometimes she just wants her Sonic slushie. And even though she shouldn't have the sugar, and it's sometimes I just needed to say, okay, let me go get she had a very special order that nobody knew.
I mean, when my grandma moved up here after Katrina, she was 75 and she had been living a very modest life. And it was like, okay, I know she's diabetic and I know she really needs to watch what she has. In the same token, I also knew quality over quantity. She couldn't see. I could put on a wrestling video game. She thought she was watching a wrestling match. That's how poor her vision was. So I tried to make the best. And she wanted a strawberry milkshake. It's like, well, so we started with the Ensure. But then there was, one day it's like, for her birthday, it's like, well, I'm going to go get you a strawberry frappuccino. She had never had one before. It was a great treat for her. So sometimes, especially when you're dealing with the fact that these may be their last days, and that, which is the hardest thing in the world to deal with.
Yeah.
You kind of say, okay, quality versus quantity. Do you want them to enjoy, or do you want them to be eating gruel and miserable?
Right.
I mean, and you have to turn around, look back at your own self and go, how do I want to live my last days?
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely a teaching moment for me, just because I would fly back and forth from Maryland to Missouri and help take care of her for like a month at an end. And then we had friends and family and things like that were helping. And, and as the perpetual kid, I wanted my mom just to be the mom that I knew, and so it took a long time for me to kind of get to that point of where not just to fight it, not to, and of course we also, but then I'd have to deal with things like, oh, I want to go to Walmart. She'd want to go to Walmart every day. And this was during COVID. And so I'm like, Mom, you can't go to, we can't, I don't want to go to Walmart.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to Walmart and I'm not getting COVID. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you're not going to Walmart. We don't need to go to Walmart every day, Mom. So it's just fight, we would argue over like, and of course now again, hindsight, I'm like, those are all silly, stupid things. And didn't really matter in the big picture of life. And, and again, it's like, okay, if she wants to go to Walmart, okay, let's just buck it up and
peas
and and go back to being that, but yeah, you have to, it's a picking and choose kind of thing. It's assessing it and being able to, sometimes it's good to take a step back and remove yourself from situations and just look at it and go, okay, what am I doing? Where am I at? And what am I doing? And how, is this good for me? Is it good for the other person? And take stock of things.
It's funny because right before I started this, my stepsister emailed me or texted me a picture of my dad and her. And it's like, I haven't seen my dad in a while. And it's like, wow, yeah, my dad is starting to look old, and it's weird because you don't think about it. It's like, you can still go back in time and think about when you were 20. And it's like, well, wait a second. And I remember when and like you're saying, I want my mom being younger. I want her being, healthy.
Yeah.
And it's like all of a sudden this switch flips and you're starting to see them in a different light.
Yeah. It is. It's a hard transition as a kid, I mean, I'm going to be 49 in July and, I'm still like, oh, I'm the kid and I'm still, I'm her oldest and I'm still the kid, and, so it is hard. It's hard to, it's a hard transition when you start seeing that your parents transitioning, as they get older and not able to do the things that they were once able to do. And you're like, oh, wait a minute, and so, yeah, it's it's life and we have to deal with it. There's not a lot of other options there, but
for me, it was kind of surreal because my mom died when I was 22 or 23. And when she died, it's like, okay, that went through the whole trauma and losing somebody when you're younger. There was a whole thing to unpack there. So I didn't watch her age. And it's like when I hit 41, because that was her age, it was kind of like, okay, so I'm the same age as her. When I hit 42, I'm like, I outlived her. But then I watched my grandmother age. So it was like, even though I didn't have my mom to watch.
Right.
And the thing I regret the most, and this is going to sound bad, I guess, is I didn't look at my mom's health history. I was too young. I didn't think, hey, you really want to write down what she had, because that way it's all documented for you because, your genes, it's in your DNA.
Right. Yeah.
You don't think about those things. You're just like, okay.
Yeah. No, you don't. I mean, it's, I was very fortunate. I came from my mom's side of the family, like all the women, my great aunt lived to be 100. My grandmother lived to be 99. So death for me prior to these last couple of years was always kind of, it was always, I rationalized it because they had so much in their life that I was like, it's okay because they'd reached this pinnacle of sorts. And so that, so I didn't really have to deal with death in a lot of ways. And, but then, losing my father, he was my stepfather, but he was much older than my mom. We knew that day would come, but he was so much like nobody would have ever known his age. Nobody ever, guessed his age right. He was always active. So seeing that happen, and then it like hit back to back with my mom, and my mom was only 67. So I've had that same thought. I've like literally like, oh, I'm going to be 49. Like, how old will my kids be when I'm 67? Like, like I've done this math and, I've thought about this and okay, what, and of course I don't know what life holds, but yeah, and then of course I went on the whole, medical journey of like, okay, I have to get the colonoscopy. I have to do, I have to do all these things. And, whereas my sister is the opposite, where she hasn't done all these, and I'm like, nope, got to get the appointment.
It's the whole,
right. And I'm like, I'm just dealing with it now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you think back, and I'm sure you remember this, your aunts, your mom with her friends or whatever, and they're all talking about their health issues. And you're just sitting there going, don't you have something better to talk about? And then now you're like, wait a second, you're having a conversation with your friends about health. And it's like, oh,
well, my shoulder was acting up yesterday, and I was telling my best friend, I was like, I did work out. And she's like, well, what did you do? And I was like, I did shoulder presses. And she's like, well, that's why your shoulder hurts, you idiot. And I'm like, I don't know. This feels worse.
Somehow that connection that we are no longer in our 20s does not compute. It's like, I remember my father-in-law wanted to move it. He was giving us a table. And we're like, okay, well, we'll come pick it up. And he had keys to the house at the time. And we come in and the table and chairs is in the living room where, we can move it wherever. The man was in his 80s. By himself, he moved the table and the chairs. I'm like, is your dad trying to check out? Because that's a heart attack waiting to happen.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, he even told us he got up on the roof of his house. He had a single story house, a ranch. And he got up on the roof and he forgot how to get down. It took him a while to remember how to get down because it just wasn't there. And it's not that he knew that it wasn't that he couldn't use a ladder. It was just, there was the intimidation fear factor that brought in.
Yeah. And well, I mean, fear is the other big factor that, oftentimes why we choose not to do things or if you are fearless, you maybe do too many crazy things and then have the other aspect of regret. So, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think when, life throws you curveballs and, definitely losing my mom was one of those things that, it puts a lot of things in perspective and it's just, I don't tend to get as stressed out about certain things as much anymore. They still peak up, but for the most part, I just kind of I take things more in stride because I'm just like, hey, we don't really know how much, time we all have on this planet. So, I've got to choose how I'm going to, what is the energy I'm going to expend on certain people and things. So,
right. So you call yourself the accidental entrepreneur, which is way off topic. We were just talking about it. So let's switch gears. And why do you call yourself that?
It goes back to that first story back in 2017. So I was taking a coaching course at the time. I really, honestly, I wasn't going to become a career coach. That wasn't my intention. I took it and I was like, oh, we'll see. I wasn't even going to use it. I don't, if I was offered to the course and I was like, sure, I'll take it. And so I took it and then, I was still working in recruiting. But because of the financial situation I had been in, I was in desperate need of money. I mean, there's nothing like glamorous about like, oh, how, like some inspirational moment. I literally was like, okay, I know I could do somebody's resume. So why not use this as a way to earn some extra cash? And seriously just started as just writing resumes, helping people with their resumes. That was all it was ever going to be. Like, I didn't have this like plan of like this vision of like, oh, I'm going to have this company or I'm going to have my own practice and I'm going to do all these amazing things. Mm-hmm. Nothing like that. And then it just slowly started to grow. And then I had a client that said, well, could you help me, prepare me for the interview? And I said, sure. Because that's something I actually loved doing when I was a recruiter. And I said, okay. And they're like, how much do you charge? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's always the question when somebody says, how much do you charge to do that? I don't
know. I'm like, I don't know. And so then it started from that. And then it just slowly started to grow. And then by 2018, by June of 2018, I had already been doing it full time. I was working full time for a company in DC, handling all their corporate recruiting. And then I was doing this literally, it was in any break I had, I'd get home, I would work on that. And it just grew and created this ability for me to do it full time by that summer. And within a year, basically, yeah, pretty much within a year. So, and then that's where that came from. And so now I'm on this entrepreneurial journey that I was not, I had no intention of ever being on. Like, that was not the plan. So, which is taught me a lot of lessons. And, it's, there's good and there's bad in it, but that's with anything that you do in life. And so, yeah, that's why I call myself the accidental entrepreneur, because it was completely by accident. It was not intended.
Sometimes the best things in life happen that way.
Yeah. I did something because I knew I could, I used the skill set I had and I could earn extra cash. And, I took that and it just slowly grew and people started recommending me to others. And, and I was really self-taught. I tell people all the time, because of the financial situation I was in, I didn't even have, like, some people say, oh, I worked on a shoestring budget. I'm like, I didn't even have a shoestring. Okay. I made like one investment in myself that was like, it wasn't even really substantial, but at the time it was substantial to me, and, and it paid off. And I was like, okay, I can, like that paid off already. Like I can do this. And so I've always been kind of scrappy in that sense. When it's come to my career, and, I was always kind of a scrappy kid anyway. So, that part of it has finally paid off, being the scrappy kid. So.
And I mean, that's the thing, is sometimes you have to keep pushing. You can't just give up.
Yeah. Well, and I couldn't. I had my, my daughter, she's 19 now, and, she was living with me at the time. And, like I couldn't give up. I couldn't,
Right.
I couldn't, back then I couldn't lay in bed all day, even though that's what I wanted to do. I had hit a really high level depression and lack confidence in myself. And, but I had to get her to school. I had to get her to field hockey practice or theater or whatever she had going on. She still relied on me. And, she still needed a mom. And so I couldn't give up. And, I couldn't just throw in the towel and say, okay, this is my life. And, something just, she was definitely the motivator to continue to push me. But also just rediscovering like that I could still, that I still had abilities, that's people that I could still go out and not just create a business for myself, but also I, still went out and got a new job, and was able to do all of that on my own. And so that I could still have that, because there came a time where I just didn't believe in myself anymore.
And that happens to a lot of us. I mean, especially as we get older, and if we've lost a job or any kind of major life change, it's like we have to rediscover who we are.
Yeah. And I really didn't know. I mean, I had lost, I had poured so much into that relationship, that I really had lost a sense of who I was and what I wanted. I didn't know what I wanted, I had goals, but I wasn't really working towards them. And, now I'm very clear about the things that I want in my life and the things that I want to try to achieve, and working towards those, and getting an understanding of what I need to do to how to achieve them.
And, right now with everything being so uncertain, it's good to actually still be able to focus on your goals, because everything else in the world seems like it's crazy right now.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much happening in this world right now. And, sometimes it's just, you sometimes, again, you have to take that step back sometimes and just say, okay, what do I need in this situation? What can I do? How can I, even how can I help? And how can I, what good can I put out in the world? And even if it may not touch a person, in another country or somewhere, what good can I do just to put it out in the world, and, to give back a little bit and to encourage somebody, because you just don't know what's happening on, the flip side, which is why I try to be very transparent. I'm transparent with my clients about like what my journey was like. Hey, this isn't, I am not the glossy Instagram, like life of an entrepreneur, living the life, I'm like, no, this is real. This is, this is where I've come from. This is my struggles. And, and I'm, even for 5 years now, still slowly rebuilding a life and of what I want it to look like now though. So, but I'm in charge of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you found your way. I mean, it's important that you found your way, and it's important that you've shown your daughter that you can pick yourself up and keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I always say I'm the luckiest mom. I have she has an older brother, and of course her. But I'm the luckiest mom that I got two humans that um, they would probably tell you they're raising me at this point, but they're very old souls. And so, but yeah, I was given two human beings that could that that I knew I could raise. So, and in many ways they do raise me. So, but yeah, I was given two extraordinary human beings in my life, and for that I'm ever grateful. And they'll it doesn't matter how old they get, they'll always be the reasons why I get up and do the things I do. So
makes sense. So is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to cover?
I mean, we've covered a lot.
Usually do.
Yeah, we dove into some things I wasn't expecting. So no, I mean, the thing I always tell people is just, don't be afraid to have a voice, to speak up for yourself, and to pursue your dreams and pursue your goals. That's kind of my biggest thing that I tell people all the time. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, Melanie, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
As always, Melanie and I had a conversation that went from her job to family to health to aging. And I think it's all things that we have talked about before, but it's a different perspective as always. I think sometimes when we think about our parents, we think about them as youngsters. We don't think about them as getting older. But the truth is, we're getting older just like they are. And if you're fortunate enough to still have them, then you should take some time with them when you can. And I think that we also don't take and look at our own expectations when we're dealing with a relationship. And that's something that all of us need to do. We need to, I'm not saying, because I had a conversation before on the show about, spontaneity in a relationship, but I think we do need to talk about our expectations and what we hope to get from this. If we're open and lay all our cards on the table, and yes, you have to hope that the other person is being truthful with you. If you're laying all the cards on the table, then people will know what you're expecting. People will understand that this is how I want this relationship to go. Now, it's not going to be cookie cutter. It's not going to be perfect, but at least they know where this is going. And that can take a little bit of pressure off, because if somebody sees you, I remember, here's a good example. Somebody I knew once talked, we both like the same guy. And she would say, I would never want him to see me without makeup. I will go to bed before he does with full makeup on. I'll get up, take it off. And then in the morning, I'll get up before he doesn't put it back on. And I thought, why would you do that? If you really love this person and they love you, they need to see the real you. So when you're looking at expectations, and that's kind of happens when we're dating, we put on this facade that, I don't want to eat, I don't want to do this. But the whole fact is, if we want to be in a relationship with somebody, we have to show them the real you, the real self. Because if you don't, how are you going to have a real relationship? The one gift I will say that my husband and I had was we started off as friends. There wasn't that expectation. Granted, the first time he saw me, I was all dolled up and he said that I was out of his league, but we started off as friends and I didn't put any onus on that. We knew how to communicate. We knew how to talk, and that made it easy. So put your expectations out there. Be honest about who you are, what you want in your life. Because if you're going to get in a relationship, whether it be a business partnership, a friendship, whatever, and this really doesn't align with you, you're going to know. So on that note, I hope you have a wonderful day, but I got some business to take care of first. So if you have a question and comment, or you want to be a guest on the podcast, please drop me a line at Donna, DAUNA, at better2podcast.com. That's Donna at better2podcast.com. If you missed an episode, you can catch it at better2podcast.com as well. And all our social media links are there. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And our sound and audio is done by Rich Zai of Third Year Audio Productions. The show has been presented to you in sponsorship with Kitty Mystic and M.Needom.com, which is me. And if you want to check out any of my books, you can do so. There's also the links to my other show on the M.Needom website, which there is the B2 soundtrack of our live show, as well as the B2D2 podcast. So I hope you check them out, and I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye. The Better 2 podcast is mixed, edited, and produced by Rich Zai of Third Year Audio Productions.